Welcome to the latest remote edition of RPPV News, bringing you stories from across the Mornington Peninsula. I'm Catie Sharp, and our top items for this edition are: population growth and homelessness cause concern, thieves destroy natural habitat in Crib Point, a new purpose for Point Nepean's quarantine station, and Peninsula photographers are invited to get COVID creative. Now for the full stories. We begin with a COVID-19 update from Shivani Pillai.
As at the 13th of August, Victoria had 7,866 active cases, which is a slight drop, and 8 deaths. The total number of deaths in Victoria is 275. There has been an increase in active cases on the Mornington Peninsula to 43 and in Frankston to 77. Premier Daniel Andrews has said that restrictions would be in place until next year if Victorians did not adhere to them and case numbers did not decrease. There have been some concerning increases in regional Victoria, including Ballarat and Geelong. Mr Andrews has urged Victorians not to travel to regional Victoria. Data released by the state government shows warehouses, abattoirs, and food distribution services are hotspots, with clusters at retail stores and supermarkets. There have been 2,453 infections among 136 aged care homes, 630 cases across 69 schools. Hospitals and healthcare services were linked to 540 infections, and childcare centres were traced to 180 cases. There is currently an investigation underway in relation to an outbreak at Peninsula Private. Last week, we reported that residents of St Basil Aged Care Hotspot had been relocated to Peninsula Private, raising concerns despite safety assurances by Ramsay Health. And in good COVID news, Mornington Community Information and Support Centre has a supply of free, reusable, single-use masks for those struggling amid the tougher COVID-19 restrictions. Rotary and Boomerang Bags joined forces to provide the 100 reusable masks. The centre is continuing to provide food and support throughout the Stage 4 restrictions. Those in need are asked to call 5975 1644 Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. or to arrange a visit. Support is also available at Western Port Community Support 5979 2762 and Southern Peninsula Information and Support 5986 1285. Support one another and stay safe. That's the COVID-19 report. I'm Shivani Pillai. Back to you, Catie.
Thank you, Shivani. Research is being conducted into population growth on the peninsula over the next 2 decades. A housing and settlement strategy was adopted by Mornington Peninsula Shire last week, as projections suggest the population will increase by nearly 40,000 people by 2036. The Shire is keen to maintain the characteristics and values of the region while accommodating the growth. Meanwhile, Dunkley MP Peter Murphy has called attention to what she calls a crisis of homelessness in Frankston. She stated that the Dunkley area has a social housing shortfall of around 3,000 beds, and that currently some 600 locals have nowhere to sleep. Frankston councillors are writing to state MPs to ask for more local government power to monitor and manage local housing. Thieves have been spotted cutting down trees in a Crib Point reserve in what locals describe as the worst vandalism they'd ever seen. When approached by a resident, one of the men, who was from Somerville, claimed to be collecting firewood. Others have been spotted felling trees of up to 1 metre in width. The peninsula has less than 10% of its original native vegetation left, and the Shire is clear that the forestry is protected. Anyone with information can contact the Shire on 1300 850 600. Federal Health Minister and Flinders MP Greg Hunt has voiced his concern that the Victorian government will not delay an environmental inquiry into AGL's proposed gas import terminal at Western Port. Minister Hunt argues level 4 lockdown places too many restrictions on those who want to take part. However, Victorian Planning Minister Richard Wynne says the delay would introduce severe procedural uncertainty and urged the community to adapt to the lockdown by using technology, social media, and remote conferencing. Local community opponents say the COVID restrictions mean they can't effectively participate, including reviewing an 11,000-page impact document or have independent experts assess the project site. Now we cross to David Robertson with the market update.
The level 4 lockdowns here in Melbourne and level 3 for the rest of Victoria have meant downgrades to the likely profile of the recovery out of Australia's recession. A quick summary of our updated view on the economic outlook. Victoria's second wave of COVID-19 infections has been devastating and confronting. But beyond the health implications, the jobs market is clearly at risk. In the first wave, it was hospitality, arts and rec, and tourism-dependent sectors that were hit hardest. But this time, construction and retail will join a range of businesses trying to get through these severe restrictions. The infection numbers released daily will be more insightful on the most likely direction for the national economy than the economic data itself. But to track the financial impact of the global pandemic on households, it's employment numbers that give the clearest view. Nationally, 13 million Australians were employed in February prior to the pandemic, and that number fell 7% to 12.1 million before recovering a little in June. The July numbers will be released later this week. Naturally, the Victorian events put this recovery at risk, and total hours worked, which initially fell 10%, is also at risk. But the latest easing in eligibility rules for JobKeeper will help, especially if we avoid the need for further restrictions in other parts of Australia. The RBA have updated their base case for unemployment to reach 10% by year end, before very slowly recovering. And we expect the Victorian rate to exceed this, but a much lower rate elsewhere. Federal government fiscal support packages have grown to around $230 billion, or 12% of GDP. And further extensions to this support should be welcomed. They do come at the cost of government debt, but it's important to keep in mind how favourably our numbers compare on that front as a AAA rated economy. Australia's net to GDP ratio has risen from 19% last year to around 25% today and 35% next year. Gross debt is around 35% today and heading for 45%. But these numbers are the envy of most economies around the world. The government can access funding at under 1% for 10 years, and Australia's growth rate for the decade ahead should be more than double that rate. So, in a low inflation era, this approach does make sense. The financial markets, therefore, are seeing unique conditions: a record high for the value of gold, a record low for long-term interest rates, and for stock markets, fresh record highs in the US indices. The fact that the US NASDAQ index and the broader S&P 500 have held up so strongly despite COVID-19 conditions in the USA shows their reporting season has been faring better than feared, together with ongoing monetary and fiscal support. And similarly, here in Australia, reporting season is upon us. Investors will be looking at the short-term impacts, but also an eye to longer-term prospects, including assumptions about the viable vaccine being successfully trialled and then made available. So once again, the outlook for the markets, for jobs, and for society rests with the health crisis and how effectively we manage it. And lastly, property prices have been diverging in the pandemic period since March, up in many regions and in the capital cities of Canberra, Hobart and Adelaide, but 0.5% lower on average in Brisbane, 1.7% in Sydney, and down 3.5% in Melbourne. Making predictions in this environment is harder than ever, but we can be very confident that the RBA official cash rate will stay at 0.25% for years to come, and that the government can continue to afford to provide fiscal support as required. So, assuming the health crisis can be effectively managed, the long, slow path out of recession will gain momentum, and the relativities of our economic strengths can come to the fore. And that's the market update from Bendigo Bank.
Monash and Melbourne universities are set to co-helm a new major research centre at Point Nepean's historic quarantine station. The federal government has offered $25 million to build a world-class marine and oceanographic research and education centre on the site. The universities will work in collaboration with Parks Victoria to build what will become the National Centre for Coasts, Environment and Climate using the station's existing buildings. The centre will conduct research on marine and coastal ecosystems, climate science and environmental management. Coming up after the break, Councillor David Gills discusses the improved planning controls and exemptions for vegetation removal on the peninsula, a win for local communities.
Battery World now open in Mornington.
We know batteries. We know our 75D23Ls from our DIN 65LHs. And we know which is best for you. We have the range and a spark no one else can match because we live and breathe batteries, those beautiful boxes and cylinders that power our lives and our passions. That's why we're the batteryologists. We're Battery World.
Battery World Shop 1, 43 Mornington Tyre Road, Mornington.
Welcome back. The Mornington Peninsula Shire has welcomed changes to current bushfire protection exemptions. But how will local landowners and lovers of the peninsula view the changes? RPPV reporter Deborah Marr takes up the story with Shire Councillor David Gill, who discusses what the changes mean to the wider community. He also discusses bushfire threats as we head into the warmer months.
Thank you for your time today again, Councillor Gill. Now, changes to the bushfire protection exemption through the amendment of BC 176 recently has been welcomed by the Mornington Peninsula. Could you just go through a little bit, try and simplify it in words? I know it's a huge subject, but if we can sort of break it down and then tell locals where they can go to get more information, I think that's the best way to tackle this. So if you could just first clarify maybe what the bushfire protection exemptions is.
Thanks, Deborah. For a long time, since Black Saturday, bushfires, decade more ago, at that stage, the state government brought in extreme measures to protect life. And the measures were to declare all of Victoria bushfire prone, which meant towns, cities, villages, all had special regulations brought in for tree and vegetation clearance, which basically meant that it was very, very simplified for people to be able to remove vegetation without a permit. And of course, that's had a devastating effect on places like the Mornington Peninsula, where we've got less than 10% of Indigenous vegetation left. That's not the only reason for that to happen, but it's one of the reasons where people are able to clear without a permit. So gradually, the state government has removed that ability in built-up areas, and they've done it in the city because all of Melbourne, even the commercial area of Melbourne, was declared bushfire prone originally. They just went with one wholesale piece of legislation, and one size fits all. They've gradually removed that, and they've removed the inner suburbs. But places like Frankston are still bushfire prone, even the commercial centres, and the same on the Mornington Peninsula. Now, we've got this new legislation which will remove some of the areas on the peninsula from that exemption for not needing permits to cut down vegetation. Now, the essence of it is close to your house or close to a building or close to a boundary line, a fence line, that's where you didn't need a permit. So now we've got the legislation from the Planning Minister that says you will need a permit in a lot more of those areas.
Okay, so if I'm in a particular bushfire prone area, which we call the BPA, if I was to want to chop down a tree that's like within 10 metres of my house, can I do that without a permit?
Well, there's now limitations on that. That's what you could do. So basically, and I think people have to understand how devastating this is for our wildlife, for our koalas, and for our vegetation. If you've got a large tree, it was the canopy and the width of the canopy that the measurements were taken from. And basically the measurements are 4 metres from the boundary, but it's not the trunk of the tree, it's the canopy. So imagine if you've got one large tree on a normal building block,
Wow.
You can cut that down without a permit. So we're trying to work with the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council and trying to have the minister who's in charge, state government, look at the exemptions, look at the real situation and not one size fits all. And now the minister has been already gradually removing this in areas where bushfire doesn't really apply. And the Mornington Peninsula has received some help, but a lot of the area of the peninsula hasn't received that help. And there are some areas of the peninsula that are bushfire prone. And it may be not obvious because grassland goes very quickly in a bushfire.
Yes, down
And
here.
a lot of grass, and that remains bushfire prone. It's where you have a single tree in your backyard and you didn't need a permit to remove it that has had a big effect on vegetation coverage. We're trying to encourage people to plant trees, and we want to have an urban canopy of trees if we can, for lots of reasons, and climate change is one of them. Temperature rising is one of them, and the effects that trees and vegetation have to control that. We don't want to see vegetation removed. We want to see more people being very choosy about planting the right things that will encourage wildlife, encourage koalas, will help our urban environment. And this is a step in the right direction from the Planning Minister.
Are people a little bit nervous about planting trees? We know that we need them, but of course, the more you plant trees, the more prone they are to burning in a bushfire situation. Is that happening? And also, if we did have a bushfire down on the peninsula, just explain a little bit about how that would follow through. How would the CFA and how would we deal with that?
Yeah, thank you. Look, the peninsula is very different to the country areas in central and around Victoria. The huge bushfires we had are not the things that we had planned or expect on the Mornington Peninsula. We're fairly insular. We're surrounded by water except for one end, the Frankston end. We don't see the problem of having huge bushfires that travel for weeks with embers jumping kilometres away. We have a different situation on the Mornington Peninsula. Our main concerns with bushfire will be the ravines and gullies, such as in Mount Eliza and Mount Martha, where fires can race up, and there's houses very close on each side of what used to be creeks and so on. So they're the fire brigade's really big concerns because there's housing in those areas. And very close, very difficult to get to. They're the things that we need to continue to look at.
Yes, well, just getting back to people planting trees, we do need to plant trees for a lot of reasons that you've mentioned today, which is wildfire and the canopy and the character of the peninsula that we want to maintain. But I guess would be a little bit nervous about that. But if you just explain that, we're not going to have these big fires like we do, in New South Wales and part of Victoria. We are on a peninsula, we are surrounded by water. So as much as we do need to be aware of it, we probably don't need to panic, and we really need to think about planting more trees.
We will still in the future have dangerous fires and fires that get out of hand, and fires that are potentially going to kill and have devastating effects, like in Gippsland, like in New South Wales, on wildlife and people and people's property. That's part of living in Australia, probably. It doesn't mean that we relax at all, but we don't want to go. We have a balance of protecting wildlife, protecting vegetation, and trying to make sure that we do the safety issues as well as we can. And local CFAs are willing to go out and talk, and they're volunteers. They're willing to spend their time going out to talk to people. I'm at Balnarring, and several times in the last few years, the local CFA at Balnarring come out and they go around different areas and they discuss fire danger in your particular area with local people. It's a brilliant scheme. They're very willing to do it. Anyone who's involved in a local group or even on a street corner.
Yeah, I think that's important to get involved in community. I know that you can call your local CFA and they can come around and help you there, especially when we're going into spring and summer as those months come up. Look, thank you, Councillor Gill. I hope that we have clarified some of the mystery around this new amendment that has come through.
And if people wish to contact the council on the webpage or a phone call, then we'll have more information about what the changes have meant for local people. But your local CFA is the best resource that we have, protecting us from bushfire and other fires on the peninsula. And we do have fire prevention officers working for the Shire, and they will talk to you too.
Councillor David Gill, thank you for your time again today. I'm Deborah Marr. Back to you, Katie.
Thank you, Deborah. 3 intersections are to get a makeover as part of the federal government's Black Spot Safer Roads program. Road improvements will occur at the intersection of Frankston-Dandenong Road and O'Grady's Road in Carrum Downs, the intersection of McClellan Drive and Sky Road at Langwarrin, and at Mount Eliza Way west of the Nepean Highway in Mount Eliza. Sea Road Ferries has suspended its weekend ferry service between Sorrento and Queenscliff for the first time in 33 years. Weekday services will continue for essential travel and permitted work. The decision was made to ensure restrictions are being adhered to while still helping essential workers. The weekend ferries will hopefully be back in action from the 19th of September. Frankston City residents can apply for foreshore parking permits online as of now. The new permits will allow the city's residential ratepayers and tenants to park for free at Frankston and Seaford foreshores. For more information and to apply for a new permit, visit frankston.vic.gov.au. And Mornington News is inviting local photographers to share their lockdown pictures. They're looking for photos that in some way reflect these unusual times. Get out your phone and your mask, stick to restrictions and use your creativity. Then email your pictures with a short caption to lockdown@mpnews.com.au. The images will be published on the Lockdown Pictures page of the paper. Now we go to Alana with the coming week's weather report.
Hello, we didn't see you there. I was too busy practicing my pranayama with my potted plants. It's Alana here with your RPPV 7-day weather forecast for the Mornington Peninsula. Tomorrow, Thursday the 13th of August, it's looking like we'll have a 90% chance of showers in the early morning and we'll reach a top of 17 degrees. On Friday, you can expect up to 5 millimetres of rain. It'll most likely be raining in the early afternoon and into the evening and we'll have a top of 16 degrees. On Saturday, you can expect showers in the evening again and we'll reach a top of 14 degrees. It will drop down to a low of 6 degrees overnight to Sunday. You can expect a wet and rainy start to your Sunday morning and we'll have a top of 14 degrees on Sunday to end your weekend. On Monday next week, we'll have up to 3 millimetres of rain, most likely later in the afternoon and in the evening though, and we'll have a top of 15 degrees. On Tuesday, we'll reach just a top of 12 degrees We will have an 80% chance of showers on Tuesday and up to 8mm of rain. So I'll be staying inside, mothering my plants and working, and I hope you are all staying safe and staying connected. We'll see you next week.
There will be no surf report until the end of stage 4 restrictions, so that's all from our team here at RPPV News, serving the community with stories that matter to you. Remember, if you go outside for one of the 4 essential reasons, wear a mask. If you're feeling at all unwell, get tested and stay at home until your results are back. Keep watching and do tell your friends. Bringing you the news from coast to coast across the Mornington Peninsula, I'm Catie Sharp. See you for the next edition.